Everybody, or almost everybody these days, claims to be in favor of more freedom. But unsurprisingly, perhaps, everyone seems to disagree about exactly what freedom is. There are many different ways to understand freedom. Today, I just want to talk about two. Two kinds of freedom that play a big role in modern political theory. Positive freedom on the one hand, and negative freedom on the other. Let's take a freedom that many people would like to have, the freedom to play professional sports. There are two important ways in which someone might be unfree to play in the NBA, say. They can be unfree because there are rules in place preventing them from playing in the NBA. If you're a woman, or you under the age of 18, for example, there are rules backed by the force of law that will forcibly prevent you from playing, even if you find a team that's willing to sign you. On the other hand, you can also be unfree to play in the NBA because you're simply bad at basketball, like me. Or because you have some kind of handicap that prevents you from playing basketball at all. In these cases, it doesn't really matter what the rules are. The absence of external impediments is not the main thing stopping you from playing in the NBA. It's your own lack of talent and ability. In the former case, when there's an external barrier, like a law or a person holding a gun to your head, then you're unfree in the negative sense of the term. Negative liberty is just the absence of obstacles, barriers, or constraints. In the latter case, though, if you have a medical problem that impedes your ability to play basketball, or if you're just lazy and not terribly athletic, then your lack of freedom to play in the NBA isn't the result of external obstacles, but the result of your own lack of ability or power. In this case, what you lack is positive freedom. This distinction between positive and negative freedom applies to almost every kind of freedom you can imagine. It holds true for your freedom to buy a car, your freedom of speech, your freedom to vote in an election, your freedom to marry the person of your choice. In all of these cases, the obstacles to your freedom can come from either external sources or your simple lack of power or ability to perform the action required. As I said earlier, almost everybody loves freedom, but people often value very different kinds of things about freedom. For some, freedom is mostly about not being subject to the control of others. It's about the absence of something. For others, freedom is about being in control and having the power to do things. In other words, it's about the presence of something. Now, my students sometimes tell me, well, can't it be both? And sure, it can be both. But when it comes to politics, each kind of freedom suggests opposite and often mutually incompatible types of actions. A commitment to positive freedom suggests an active state that interferes with some, if only to tax them, in order to enable others. For example, giving people more positive freedom means giving them more resources and options. Policies that advantage the disabled, for instance, or the vulnerable, help make them more free to be in control over their lives than they otherwise might be. A commitment to negative freedom, on the other hand, suggests a much less active state. One where the state doesn't tell people what to do, doesn't restrain them, in other words. Doesn't tell them what to value, doesn't tell them how to pursue what they value. Examples of this might be the state holding back from telling people whether or not to buy health insurance, where to send their children to school, or what kinds of drugs, medical or otherwise, they can ingest. Now, often these goals of restraint and enabling conflict. Enabling some people means restraining others. Giving equal time to candidates, for example, during presidential campaigns, means telling media outlets whom to give airtime to and how much. Enabling the poor often means disabling wealthier people from using part of their income or inheritance. Enabling the sick often means telling doctors how much they can charge and perhaps even what kinds of patients they're allowed to take on. Enabling local farmers, if you like local food, probably means disabling consumers who might rather purchase their food from further away. Now, sometimes there are ways around this. You can enable some without disabling others. I think of the example of oil-rich countries, for example, where the government collects a lot of revenue from its ownership of oil fields, which it leases to foreign companies. In those cases, the government collects tax revenue not from rich citizens, but from its ownership of resources. In those cases, it doesn't need to tax the rich in order to enable the poor. But those cases are more the exception than the norm. Ultimately, you're going to have to decide which freedoms you find politically more important. Perhaps it's the case that bringing about one kind of freedom or another is likely to bring about better consequences for society. And so you'll favor that kind of freedom, the freedom that promotes the best consequences overall. Perhaps, on the other hand, pursuing one kind of freedom over the other is simply a more appropriate way of respecting individuals and honoring their dignity. In that case, maybe you'll support the kind of freedom that best respects individuals, not the kind of freedom that brings about the best consequences. But in any event, the next time you hear someone talking about freedom, try to figure out what they're talking about. Are they talking about positive freedom, or are they talking about negative freedom? And try to figure out whether the increase in one type of freedom that they're suggesting might not be accompanied by a decrease in another kind of freedom. Freedom's a wonderful thing, but it's not always the case that we can have it in every sense of the word.